Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on August 6, 2025. Within the past several years, Green parties across the West have seen a significant decline in their electoral results. In Germany, where the Green Party has enjoyed more electoral success than in any other country, the Greens saw their share of the vote decline from 14.7% in the prior German federal election to 11.6% in the election held in Germany earlier this year. The Greens lost 33 of the 118 seats they won in Germany's 2021 election. In the US presidential election last year, US Green Party candidate Dr. Jill Stein, whom I interviewed on this program, won only 0.56% of the vote, so less than 0.6% of the vote. The last time Ms. Stein ran for the presidency in 2016, she received 1.07% of the vote, or almost twice as much as she received in the 2024 presidential election. And in Canada's federal election held earlier this year, the Green Party saw its share of the popular vote drop to 1.22% from 2.33% in the prior election, a reduction in voter support of almost 50%. In this year's election, the Greens lost one of the two seats they held in Canada's parliament, with party leader Elizabeth May being the only Green candidate to survive the carnage. Until recently, the Green Party of Canada had consistently won around 6% of the popular vote in Canadian federal elections. The decline in support for Green parties in Western countries has been accompanied by a loss of governmental support for environmentally responsible policies. Under US President Donald Trump, for example, the US government has taken a wrecking ball to environmental regulation. Here in Canada, newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney, a former Goldman Sachs banker, has killed the consumer carbon tax that his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, adopted back in 2018. So what ails the Green movement in the West, and what can be done to improve its standing among voters? To help answer these questions, I've invited on to Reason to Resist Emily Lowan. Emily is a candidate for the leadership of the Green Party in British Columbia, a province lying on the Pacific coast of Canada. The BC Green Party is the oldest Green Party in Canada, and it was founded in 1983. So its fortunes tend to reflect those of the broader Green movement in the country. Thank you very much for joining us today, Emily.
Thank you for having me, Dimitri.
So, Emily, why don't you start by telling us about your background, particularly as it relates to Green Party politics and the values of the Green Party?
Yeah. I am a renter and organizer for climate justice and Indigenous solidarity. I've been working in these movements for about a decade, but funnily enough, I got my start in the BC Green Party. They got me in the door when I was, I think, just 16 years old, a little younger, and I remember it being an open door and at the time an inspiring entry point into a kind of work that I hadn't really encountered. And they were talking about lowering the voting age and climate action in a way that, yeah, felt really compelling. And so I kind of cut my teeth as a baby campaigner in the BC Greens. And then I became so disillusioned with electoral politics and the first past the post system, and I think that was also really driven by the failure of a change to proportional representation in BC. But I think overall, like, I was just so paralyzed and terrified by the intersecting crises of our time. And I just really hungered for more systemic change and to face the fossil fuel industry head on, to face these billionaires and oligarchs that were stealing my future directly. And I felt like electoralism was just this really sort of weak, tepid vehicle for that. And so I started doing movement organizing, and that brought me into my student union, where I was doing fossil fuel divestment organizing. And after years of pressure, we won our campaign. We won, housing bylaws and other wins. And yeah, that it also brought me into the corporate mapping project at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. That was really an investigative research shop that shone a light on the deep reach of the fossil fuel industry and just how, yeah, the industry uses its power and economic influence to shape our regulations and civil society as well. So yeah, that then I went to the Canadian Climate Action Network, and did a lot of like coalition leadership, and have been working on frontline fossil fuel fights, like the MAGA-backed PRGT pipeline in British Columbia. So yeah, I have had a winding history through climate and Indigenous rights movements in BC, and now find myself back at the BC Greens with a pretty clear understanding of what needs to shift in order to become a viable leftist vehicle and a force for change.
So before we delve into that question, a very, very important one. You're only 24 years old, and if you were to win this leadership contest, I imagine you would be the youngest leader of any political party in Canada. And Lord knows we could use some young talent in the halls of power today. But it's remarkable that someone of your age has decided to take this challenge on. And could you sort of enlighten us as to why you decided to take this challenge on at so young an age?
Yeah, we're not living in a normal time, and linear age doesn't feel particularly relevant. And I think because I started to understand the crises that we were up against from a very, very early age, um, I grew up quickly. And I don't think that's fair or right, but here we are. And yeah, out of that space of terror, honestly, I just sharpened myself and got really serious about how I could, yeah, extend my capacities, and do more and learn more. And so yeah, here I find myself here at 24, and yeah, I do think we need more young people in these positions. It's it's our future and lives on the line, that like we will be grappling with the decisions that these governments are making, across our lifetimes. And yeah, in BC, people under 30 are a third of the population, and we have yeah, basically no representation under 30 in the legislature.
Well, for the record, I'm embarrassed by how badly my generation has screwed things up. So I would be more than happy to see your generation take over. But returning to the subject that I raised at the outset, namely the significant decline in numerous important jurisdictions for support in support for the Green Party in recent years. What do you think accounts for that, and what do you view as the cure to this ailment that has beset the green movement globally?
Yeah, I think in about 2019, 2020, we saw a massive surge in the popularity of green parties across the world, and certainly in Canada. And I'll speak to that context more specifically. It was my first job in politics, actually. I was working a federal Green Party campaign in 2019. And that's when we thought there was going to be a green wave that, swept the country, because there had been just unprecedented numbers of young people and older generations taking to the streets and acting on climate, triggered by the Greta Thunberg movement. But I do remember in that time, we were still stuck in a very neoliberal paradigm in the climate movement, very stuck on individualism and consumer-based choices. And I think, yeah, it was there. I mean, there was a lot of efforts of movements to counter that and to connect to the broader picture of our capitalist system and all these drivers of the climate crisis and wealth inequality, social inequality. Um, but yeah, it did feel like the broader conversation didn't get there, despite sort of the mass mobilization, and we didn't fully see green parties and green leaders taking up the helm. So, for instance, in and around that time in the BC Green Party, uh, Andrew Weaver was in power, and he really remade the BC Greens, in a very neoliberal image, and galvanized a base of older folks, of homeowners, of yeah, people who had a very narrow definition of what climate action needed to look like. And it's a toolkit that's largely limited to tinkering around the borders of our system, of the carbon tax, and all these more incrementalist reforms that don't actually challenge, yeah, uh, the chokehold that billionaires and corporations have on our economy. And so, yeah, I think that that was a real limitation, which takes me to sort of the broader context of, like, how this centrism, in the Green Party, and the need to sort of, because they are a marginal voice still, and marginally represented, I think that creates this dynamic where, um, there's a real, like, reasonability politics at play, um, where and yeah, where yeah, green leaders or the green movement, feel that they need to sort of appeal to a centrist voter, and, um, be speaking only to sort of the facts of climate science, rather than really building and galvanizing young people and workers and everyone that is so deeply disaffected by the status quo. And so I think that that orientation towards sort of centrism and needing to be seen as this like reasonable, force in government, yeah, has hindered the green movement and green politics. And I think they've really lost touch with their base, and maybe even in sort of the early '80s, when the BC Green Party was founded. I think it was really founded by activists, by people like Adrian Carr, obviously, who co-founded Wilderness Committee, and who were really at the time sort of the backbone of the environmental movement, as they knew it then. Um, and so, yeah, I think today we we've seen a big drift, from the Greens, and really what should be the movements that are backing them and driving them. And yeah, I think it's a huge, like, void and vacuum in our BC political system. And I think the cure is co-socialism, and, really pursuing just a a strong wealth redistribution agenda. Like, for I know this is a very, like, global audience, but this is something that I think is true all around the world. Um, in the case of BC, British Columbia, last fall, we narrowly survived a far-right government in the last election, um, and since then, we have not learnt our lesson whatsoever. So the governing party and is frankly just asleep at the wheel to US fascism, and the lessons that we actually needed to learn from that election. There was a massive rise of conservatives, of young people voting conservative for the first time. And so I think we'll continue to see that, like, right-wing populist movements, who are promising to save the middle class by really scapegoating vulnerable groups. Um, so I think this leadership race, I'm biased, but I think it has massive stakes for the political future of BC and Canada, actually, because we, uh, are at sort of a crossroads. And I think if the BC Greens were to come forward with a bold agenda that tackles the massive inequalities in wealth and power, um, yeah, that space will be taken up by some seriously ominous political movements and the other parties in BC. And so, yeah, I through my campaign is entitled "Fight the Oligarchs, Fund Our Future." I think it encapsulates it well. And we're seeing just a massive hunger from young people, from workers across this province, thousands of people who have not, been involved in a political party, but resonate deeply with this reality. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to see how the leadership race unfolds. Um, but
It, it,
yeah,
it's quite refreshing to hear someone running for the leadership of a Canadian political party to say the word oligarchy, because that's not a word we hear nearly enough in Canadian politics. In fact, the so-called mainstream politicians avoid it like the plague, even though there is, as I'm sure you know, Emily, a very powerful oligarchy in this country that exercises an extraordinary degree of control over economic policy, foreign policy, and so forth. But to go back to the question about this decline that's happened, my own view is that to a large degree, it's not the sole factor, but to a large degree, this has been precipitated by the fact that the Green parties of the West have really strayed from their origins. And I want to go back to the legacy of the co-founder of the German Green Party, Petra Kelly, who was
mm,
very, very anti-war. And in fact, the Green Party was, the Green movement was in its DNA an anti-war, anti-militarist party.
mhm,
But now you have the spectacle of the Green Party of Germany being one of the most pro-war parties uh, in Europe, again, in the so-called mainstream of Europe, and parties like the AfD on the right in Germany actually advocating for an end to the Ukraine war. I mean, it's absolutely stunning that this has happened. And here in Canada, we had Amanda Kutner, who was the interim leader, staked out a position of not sending weapons to Ukraine. But when Amanda was replaced by the current leader, that policy changed, and the party at the federal level has supported the sending of weapons to Ukraine. And also the Green parties generally, including the one in Canada, and I think the US is an exception to this, but the European Green parties and the Canadian Green Party don't seem to want to take on the whole subject of NATO membership. They seem quite content for Canada to be a member of NATO. Now, I recognize that you're running for a provincial Green Party, and it's not in the bailiwick of the provincial Green parties to set Canada's foreign policy. But I also understand that in the waters off BC, Vancouver Island, that there's significant activity of the United States military forces. Do they actually have a base on Vancouver Island where they do military, or offshore they do military drills with the Canadian military? Is that
yeah,
correct?
we're basically surrounded by U.S. military bases. Yep.
Right. So how do you feel about that? And do you think that the Green Party needs to become more outspoken about um, anti-militarism, about NATO, about pursuing peace as opposed to war?
Yeah, I absolutely I think in my provincial position, furthering the movement of anti-militarization is so crucial. And obviously that's yeah, it's we do have that ability to be, a moral voice of clarity, and to also, put pressure on federal Greens and yeah, other leaders at any level to be that voice of peace and anti-militarization globally.
Right. And so, on the subject of war, you put out a statement recently about the genocide in Gaza, and you haven't been shy about calling it that. Uh, for which I'm sure many Canadians will applaud you. Um, However, when I was in the shadow cabinet of the Green Party, the federal Green Party, I had a tussle with that gentleman you mentioned a few minutes ago, Andrew Weaver, because in 2016, I and others in the shadow cabinet brought forward a resolution in the federal party supporting BDS, and it passed over the objections of the leader at the time and currently Elizabeth May. And Mr. Weaver publicly and privately denounced us for supporting BDS. Um, what do you think the prevailing sentiment is today in the grassroots of the BC Green Party when it comes to the subject of the genocide in Gaza and Palestinian human rights?
So I am sort of an outsider to the party. I'm a month into my campaign, and I think I'm still really getting to know some of the establishment base. Um, I will say that I was warned by people who know sort of the insides of the party better that this could tank my campaign, the statement that I put out, and there were many words of warning, and I haven't seen the backlash yet. Maybe it's I yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure when and how I'll feel that resistance. But I will say that the response to the statement has been overwhelmingly positive, um, from my community's grassroots, like Palestine organizers and yeah, climate justice organizers, Indigenous rights organizers across BC, and yeah, I'm really heartened by that
Mhm.
embrace, and how people have yeah, really appreciated that the clarity and the policy positions, because I talk also about education reform, about divestment for public pension funds and other financial assets in BC,
Mhm.
as well as down to an Israeli wine ban. That's another grassroots campaign.
Right. It's interesting. Angus Reid just did a poll in which it asked Canadians. Um, you may be aware that Donald Trump threatened to take even harsher trade measures against Canada because of the Prime Minister's announcement that Canada would recognize the state of Palestine. And so Angus Reid um, asked Canadians if, in fact, there are going to be consequences in Canada's trade relationship resulting from the recognition of the state of Palestine. Do you think that the government should withdraw its initiative to recognize the state of Palestine? And 63% said no, and only 20% said yes. So more than 3 to 1. Uh, and obviously, I think Canadians understand that Canada's trading relationship with the United States is very, very impactful economically in this country. I think 63% of our trade is with the United States. So I thought that was an absolutely remarkable result that 63% would resist the pressure of the Trump
Yeah.
administration. Um, but now that I'm on the subject of trade, how do you think Canada's government should be responding to this war? I'm sure that this is a concern that is being discussed within the leadership contest. It would be surprising to me if the people of BC don't have a very sort of strong interest in these negotiations that are taking place between Canada and the United States. What do you think the approach of the federal government should be towards this bullying by the Trump administration?
Yeah, I'll speak to the provincial context, which I think is incredibly interesting, because yeah, Premier Eby has, I think, really racked up some approval ratings on his elbows up stance, by putting out like liquor boycotts, for instance, and travel advisories towards the U.S., which did get sort of flack and some back and forth dynamic with U.S. ambassadors. But it is just such a glaring hypocrisy when you look at what is actually happening with Canada's or with BC's resource policy. Um, the EB government is about to approve an American-backed, MAGA-backed uh, gas terminal off the coast of BC, which connects to the PRGT pipeline that I mentioned. Um, and fascinatingly, there are direct connections to Trump's inner circle. So these projects would directly enrich people like Leon Black, the former CEO of Apollo Global Management, who had to resign over his ties to Epstein because he offered, I think, $170 million for financial advice to Epstein a few years back. So yeah, these are some of the backers. Steve Schwartzman, who's been a longtime Trump advisor since 2016 and remains one of the top 10 donors to the MAGA movement in Trump's last presidential campaign. These are the primary backers of like the largest resource extraction projects, the largest fossil fuel projects that are happening in BC right now, violating Indigenous rights of Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en, Gitxsan and Gitnyaw rights. And to sort of turn that mirror to EB as he's posturing as being this elbows up leader when he is literally opening the door to U.S. fascist forces and American oligarchs is just such a glaring hypocrisy. And so I think that's where, I would fight, on an area that we have real ground as Greens and in provincial policy and approvals. Um, yeah.
So just for people who aren't from Canada, for their edification, EB is from the New Democratic Party of British Columbia, which is nominally social democratic, but the reality, I would suggest, is far different. Um, Now, what you've talked about, the problem of inequality. Do you think in British Columbia the tax burden is fairly allocated amongst the different income groups, or do you think that it's essential that the tax burden be borne to a considerably greater degree by those who have the most money?
Yeah. I think you can probably guess my answer. I think that tax balance between the richest and regular people in BC was actually fairer in the year 2000. And obviously, there was a massive backtracking and tax breaks for the richest 1% through the era of the conservative Christy Clark government in BC. And the BC NDP hasn't taken the reins. They have not taxed its billionaires out of existence. They've made really incremental gains to um, provide like tax cuts for low and middle income earners. But I don't think they understand or are too afraid to address the broader picture of uh, the BC's richest corporations and the 1% in this province, and the fact that it is such a deeply corrosive dynamic and an unsustainable dynamic of wealth inequality that is actively a corrosive force to our democracy and to our economy.
Well, it's been a great pleasure speaking with you. And before I let you go, could you tell people when is the leadership contest going to take place? And for those of our listeners who are eligible to participate, how can they support your campaign?
Yeah. So we are in a crunch zone right now. I'm not sure when this interview will be published,
We're going
but
to try to publish it today. So,
okay, cool. um, So yeah, we're doing a big membership drive to rebuild the base of this party, so the BC Greens can move in lockstep with social and climate movements, labor movements in British Columbia. So I'm trying to sign up as many new members as possible by August 10th. So that's this coming Sunday. We just have a few days to go. It's completely free to sign up. You do have to be a BC resident, be a Canadian citizen, or have PR. But it's free from ages 14 to 29 and just $10 if you're over 30. So it's been incredible to see the surge in membership, and I'm really excited for that to grow and grow over the course of this final week of the campaign. We were just endorsed by Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a really well-known mental health and addictions and trauma expert. He wrote the
Extraordinary.
Myth of Normal. So,
That's
and such an incredible outspoken advocate on Palestine and global human rights as well. So yeah, we're seeing some really exciting trends with the campaign, and I know, yeah, this is just sort of the beginning, like getting this wave of new members in the door, so we can build something with this party and make it an exciting, viable vehicle for the left to be a thorn in the side of the governing party and to be that beacon of real alternatives. So yeah, if you want to learn more about my campaign and signing up and all that jazz, it's emilyforbcgreens.ca. And yeah, thank you so much for having me, Dimitri. This was a really refreshing conversation.
For me too. Thank you so much. Before I let you go, when that website, if they go to the website, will they be directed to where they can sign up, or should I be putting the link to sign up to become a member of the BC Greens in the description of the video? Because I can do that if you'd like.
I mean, it's pretty smack dab on the website. Hard to
Okay,
miss.
great. So I'll put a link in the description of the video to your website, your campaign website, and I wish you the very best of results in the upcoming leadership contest.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. And this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on August 6, 2025.